I'm Brigantia Blackbird, a Blackbird's Brew. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Modern Problems, Pagan Solutions. We've got a spicy title for today's episode. Sexual politics and practices have been a hot-button issue for quite a while. And bringing up the subject at all, let alone starting with such an unequivocal opinion, is bound to raise some hackles. Some people literally come to paganism just to get away from the strictures of traditional Christianity on this topic, and have zero interest in entertaining the idea that pagan spirituality would even have an opinion. So let's begin what this video is not about. This is not about shaming anyone or seeking to control their sex life or arbitrarily setting some universal standard to be imposed upon all pagans. This is a discussion. Ideas, suggestions to consider, and what a viewer does with it or not is entirely their own affair. Secondly, I'd like to make a distinction between the legal standard for sex and factors that an individual might factor into their own decision-making on a personal level. From a legal standpoint, two consenting, non-related adults, which, why we have to say that, but two consenting, non-related adults is a perfectly acceptable standard. And no government has any business making laws beyond that. It's not the business of the state to regulate the bedroom. But from the standpoint of the personal individual, two consenting, non-related adults is just a baseline. That's the bare minimum. We also face issues of emotional involvement, dealing with unintended consequences that might come from the encounter, such as an infection or an unplanned pregnancy. To say nothing of the question about whether or not a person's sexual choices are taking them in the direction of the life they want to build, or if those choices are taking them further away from it. Let's face it, if you want to get married, raise a family, and live a life with someone, a series of one-night stands isn't exactly feeding into that goal. So today's video isn't about what people should be legally permitted to do. It's about taking a look at common behaviors and the consequences thereof, and considering whether or not a lack of sexual restraint has done us more harm than good. Of all religions, paganism emphasizes the relationship between cause and effect. And if we are going to make good choices for ourselves, that means looking at the cause and effect of our own choices, as well as being honest with ourselves about whether or not those choices actually made us happy or if they kind of made us miserable. Now, when I began my pagan studies, I came across a passage. It was a Wicca 101 type of book, and I'm sorry I can't recall the title. But the author shared a conversation she once had with a Native American lady about sexual standards. And the lady's reply was interesting. She said that the penis is sacred, the vagina is sacred, and you don't allow anything into your body that is not sacred to you, nor do you put your body into anything that is not sacred to you. And that was her take on it. And that simple statement has really stuck with me over the years. As much as some people would like to pretend, sex isn't just sex. It isn't just a matter of people coming together to create physical sensations. Human beings are more than mere meat. Therefore, logically, it follows that our sexuality is about more than physical release. It's more than just about the potential for procreation. It isn't, devoid of attachment or emotion, even down to the chemical level, if you want to look at it from that standpoint. And also sexuality, as I said, while it is a means through which we perpetuate our species, its purpose is not restricted to that. The act itself is sacred if we treat it as such. It's really how are we treating sex rather than opposed to what all the things it could be. Now we're really at the heart of the issue, because this is not about arbitrary rules. It's about how do we treat sex, and by extension, how do we treat our sexual partners. And are we treating our own bodies as something sacred to us? Are we treating our spirits as sacred? Are we treating the act itself as the exchange of energies that it is? This is particularly relevant for those who have empathic abilities. Most empaths I've met, they've acknowledged that even casual touch, say a handshake, it greatly heightens their psychic impressions. And when it comes to sex, that is even more intensified. So if one's partner is merely using one's body as a means to an end, the empathic person is going to know this beyond a shadow of a doubt. They are going to know that they absolutely do not matter to that person, and they could be absolutely anyone to them. Now, unless the empathic person is deluding to themselves, that's a different issue. But call me old-fashioned, I rather think that reducing a human being to just a sex toy made of flesh, I think that kind of takes away from the experience. Physical intimacy without emotional or spiritual intimacy, isn't the same. It makes an act that is inherently beautiful a bit lackluster or sadly even ugly. And for too many years, there have been voices in society screeching at the top of their lungs, trying to bully people into rejecting the concept of emotional involvement in sex. My question is this: is anyone happier this way? Or are they just rebelling against the norms? And by norms, I'm talking about what would have been normal circa 1950. Because clearly those are not the norms of today, and that's what people are in rebellion for. So is this just rebellion for the sake of rebellion? You're thinking you're all edgy and cool and you're rejecting all of those stuffy prudes. But what about this? I mean, what do they get out of it? You've reduced the human body to just a sex toy, and reducing people to interchangeable parts as though it doesn't matter who has contact with who, it just seems pretty empty, in my opinion. So hookup culture also encourages people to evade their natural responsibilities when it comes to sex. Don't bother to get to know the person, don't bother to treat them as anything other than just an object for your gratification, and to hell with the consequences. Ignore reality. That's the message of hookup culture. But sooner or later, reality does interfere, perhaps in the form of catching an STI or an unplanned pregnancy or just having a sense of depression. You could have the most active sex life in the world, but you could feel empty and unfulfilled. A stranger or someone that you have only a casual acquaintance with is just not going to step up to the plate for you the way that someone who loves you will, especially when we're talking about the emotional components or about the potential financial obligations if indeed a child was created. This is particularly important in the case of unplanned pregnancy. I know people like to pretend, but a person who chooses abortion, you did not make a pregnancy unhappen rather. A life did indeed come into being, and that life is part of the bloodline of both parents. It is no small thing to destroy it or to make excuses for doing so. And like it or not, one of the risks of heterosexual sex is pregnancy. If you are not willing to raise a child with someone, then perhaps you don't need to be sharing your body with them to begin with. And if you're going to do that anyway, there's absolutely no excuse for taking every precaution that you have. And an abortion is not a precaution. It's a nasty procedure to help people pretend that they didn't do what they actually did. So there are practical, emotional, and even spiritual reasons to consider sexual selectivity. Ancient pagan peoples, while not as restrictive as traditional Christians in matters of sex, are still, they still nevertheless exercised a measure of restraint. Now, it is true that in ancient Rome, they did become notorious for their promiscuity, but I will point out that that kind of behavior became common and normalized after that society went into decline. And this is a very common theme. When civilizations go off the rails, the people lose themselves in vice and in misusing what is good in life. It's a distraction to avoid reality and to avoid the responsibility of doing something to address the actual problem. And today we too live in a society in which all manner of degeneracy is encouraged, celebrated, normalized. And, let's not pretend that this is about tolerating what people get into. Increasingly, there is a very firm push to go out of one's way to express approval or even being pressured to participate. And this isn't the only warning sign we're seeing. People are getting lost to self-destructive behaviors in other areas of life. And when we look at the big picture, it's easy to see what direction the society as a whole is going. Eventually, it will reach its natural end. And the real question is, what happens after that? What standards are we setting for ourselves? What seeds are we planting for a better society? Sex and intimacy is fundamental for the formation of committed couples and marriage mates, and that in turn forms the norms and the basis for an entire civilization. So these personal decisions do matter, and they have ripple effects far beyond the sexual encounters themselves. So that's what I have for you in this topic. Leave comments, questions, concerns, complaints, arguments in the comment section below, or come on to Gilded. There's a link to join us in the description box below. And unleash your thoughts there. But that'll do it for now, and I will see you next time. Bye.